I want to carry on talking about different miracles. Last week it was the miracle of salvation. And this week I'm going to be talking about the miracle of movement. Kind of works, doesn't it? Because we're on the move. It's almost like it's all planned, isn't it? And God's got his eye over things. So I'm going to talk about the miracle of movement. But to talk about movement, first of all, I wanted to talk about being stuck. That's kind of going to be our theme of today, is being stuck and finding a way out of it, finding movement from it. Now, often my stories of my childhood involve my family farm. And today is no different. I have a story about the family farm. I don't know if you've ever been in thick mud. Now, I know here in Cyprus, we kind of don't really get mud. We just get dust, don't we? It's very rare that we have mud. But when I was a young lad, probably about 7 or 8, I went out with my cousin into the field. And we went out into this, and I was like, are we going to be okay? And my cousin who lived on the farm said, no, we'll be absolutely fine. And we got into this thick mud, and it was getting harder and harder to walk. And I don't know if you've ever worn a wellie when it comes off. So you take the step, and you go, and you realise your boot is still there, and it's too late. Your foot's in the mud. I was so stuck, my left foot then got really stuck. My uncle had to come in his tractor, come with a grabber on the front, and then he pulled me out with his tractor. So I don't know if you've ever been stuck. Probably you've never been stuck in quite that situation where someone's had to come with a tractor and pull you out of mud. But I think we all have those moments, don't we, where we're stuck somewhere that we shouldn't be stuck. Last Sunday night, I flew back to the UK, and I got to the airport, and just as I was leaving, it said, there's been an hour delay on your flight. And when you see that, you're like, it's already going to be a late flight. Anyway, I get there. As I arrive at the airport, I get another message saying your flight's been delayed an hour and 45 minutes. I was like, Anyway, get through, sit in the departures lounge, and then they announced it over the tannoy then. I'd seen it on a message, and then people were like, everyone's groaning and moaning because we're stuck where we shouldn't be. And as we were sat there, and I was like, well, it is what it is. I can't really do anything about it. I'm just going to have to sit, and I'm going to have to wait this out. Then an announcement came over the tannoy and said, anybody on EasyJet flight, EZ something something, please make your way out of the terminal. Your flight has been cancelled. And I was like, thank goodness that is not my flight. And so there were some people who were expecting to leave Cyprus, and they were stuck in Cyprus. I don't know what happened to them. All they were told was, leave the terminal and we'll tell you what's happening next, which isn't exactly what you want to hear when you're on your way home from holiday. Now, I know those are kind of like maybe trivial little things about being stuck, but I think we can all relate to, in some way, at some time or another, a moment where we've been stuck in a situation. We haven't been able to find a way out of it, and we haven't been able to find some movement. And today I'm going to be sharing from John chapter 5, verses 1 to 9. We're going to read it together, and then I've actually got the video from The Chosen. I don't know if you've ever seen The Chosen, but it's this beautiful way that it's put together in a very cinematic way. But I'm going to read it for us first, and then we're going to watch that together afterwards. It says this in John 5, verse 1 to 9. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been there, an invalid, for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me get into the pool when the water is stirred. When I'm trying to get in, someone else gets in ahead of me. Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat and walk. At once, the man was cured. He picked up his mat and walked. And if you turn your eyes to the screen, we're going to watch this portrayed in The Chosen. The reason I wanted to play that is, I think it's hard not to sit here and feel a little bit of emotion watching that. I think, as we often read scriptures in our Bible, but actually to see it portrayed like that and to see Jesus coming into a situation where the man was trapped, he was stuck, there was no way out for him. And Jesus comes in and totally transforms the situation and totally changes things. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because the obvious miracle for me to talk about is the fact that the guy got up and walked. He'd been lame. He'd been there for 38 years, I think it is. 38 years, and he stands up and walks. And that's kind of the obvious miracle, isn't it? But actually the real miracle that was happening was inside of his heart. There was something that shifted inside of that man as Jesus met with him and he spoke with him. Because the thing is, you can be healed of one thing, but you can still be bound up by another thing. You can have the physical healing, but there can still be something in your heart that hasn't shifted and in your heart that hasn't changed. And that's really what God is interested in. God is more interested in your freedom than the physical miracle. He has this conversation, this dialogue with him. It would have been easy for Jesus just to walk up and say, get up, walk, your legs are healed, carry on. He could have done that and it could have happened in a moment, but actually there was something more than that. You could see in that exchange, I know there was some cinematic editing in there, but the premise of it is exactly as it's written in our book, is where Jesus was concerned with the man. He wanted to speak to him and to hear from him. Because when Jesus says to him, do you want to get well? For that man, this meant a complete change of lifestyle. 38 years he'd been in one place, doing one thing. All he'd known was begging and waiting to try and get into this pool, because what would happen is that when the angel stirred up the water, one person would get healed, and he was waiting for that moment. So when Jesus says to him, do you want to get well? He's basically saying, do you want your life to change completely? Because you won't need to live here anymore. The things that you've experienced, the things that you've done won't be applicable to your life anymore. I'll be 38 next month, and I can't imagine living my whole life in one place, in one moment, waiting for something to happen, and then suddenly you get told everything is about to change. Everything you know is going to be transformed. And so today, I want us to look at some of the things that had kept that man trapped where he was. Some of the things that had stopped that movement from happening in his life. And so there's 3 traps that I want to talk about today and I want to speak into. And the first one is the system trap. This place held so much promise for people. It was the place where people would go, the water was stirred, and they would be healed. And I guess it makes sense. If you're lame and you can't walk, where else would you want to go? You'd want to go to the place where you think there's potential that you could be healed. But actually, when you think about it, I don't know how often exactly the water was stirred, but whenever it was stirred, there was only one person out of all the people there that was going to be healed. All of those people waiting to be healed, there was only ever one at a time that was healed. Yet there was this hope of what might come. Yet he'd been there for all those years and it had never come. Bethesda overpromised and underdelivered on miracles because he's still there all those years later. And I believe that Bethesda represented a mindset trap for him. There was this thought that by being there, that was going to be the solution. That was going to be his healing. That was going to change everything. But all these years later, nothing had changed. He was still there in the same condition as he was the moment that he first arrived. But God wants to see you free. He wants to see each one of us free. He wanted to see him free. He didn't want him to see him trapped there by his mindset that this was it, until he got in the pool that he would be free. And a mindset shift brings freedom. And that's what Jesus is talking to him there. It's all about this mindset shift. It's quite hard to say, actually. But I think for a lot of us, we look at areas in our life and we'd like to see change. But often when we look at those areas, we think it's that other people might need to change for it to work. Now maybe in your marriage you want things to change, but you're expecting your husband or your wife to change. And actually maybe it's you that needs to change. Husbands and wives, don't look at each other right now because we don't want to start any arguments. But maybe it is that you're waiting for them to change, but actually the reality is there's something that needs to change in you. You know, maybe you struggle in friendships, maybe you struggle to have friendships long term, and you're expecting other people to do things. Maybe there's a mindset shift that you have to have, that actually, I need to be different. There's something that I need to do to change the outcome of this. And I think it's fair to say that actually, for a lot of us, we want the miracle with our fruit, but we actually don't always want to deal with the root of the issue. So we're asking God for miracles in these situations, but actually there's something going on inside that we need to shift, that we need to allow God to change if we're actually going to see those fruit. Jesus is speaking to this man and saying, do you want to get well? Because the reality is getting well is going to change everything for him. But I don't know if you noticed how he responded. This man that's been there for all of these years waiting to be healed, and someone says, do you want to be healed? I would imagine the first thing that he would respond would be yes. Yes, I want to be healed. That's why I'm here. Isn't it obvious? But that's not what we read. That's not how he responds. In verse 6 to 7, he says, when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he'd been there in this condition for a long time, he asked him, do you want to get well? Sir, the invalid replied, I have no one to help me get in the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else gets in ahead of me. His response is one of, if only, or I can't do it because there's external factors that are stopping this from happening. If only I got there first, if only I was the first one in, if only someone helped me to get down there. And he's got this victim mentality of like, well, it's not going to happen to me. Where his response should have simply been, yes, that's why I'm here. I want to be healed. I want to be able to walk again. But there's something of a mindset shift that has to happen first. See, Jesus is offering the miracle, and he's more concerned with the system. He's saying it's not fair. I can't get down there. People get there in front of me. And Jesus is already offering the miracle to him, but he's missed it. And I don't know if you've ever had one of these moments where you're talking to God and you're telling him about all the problems, and you're telling him about everything that's wrong. You're telling him why things aren't working well. You say, if only this was the case, God. If only I had a better job. If only this was happening. Hey, God knows your situations far better than you even know them yourselves. But sometimes we go into those conversations just telling God, if only this, if only that. And God's just saying, just trust me. I want to do the miracle. I want the miracle to happen for you, but you've got to trust me. You've got to have that childlike faith that we're called to have of like, when God says, do you want to be healed? It's not a trick question. Jesus wasn't trying to trick him. He said, do you want to be well? And actually, we've just got it with a childlike faith to say, yes, I want to be well. The second trap is the support trap. Now, for this man, he's been there all these years. His support would come from people just like him, people in the same situation. I imagine he knew everybody around the pool. He's been there 38 years. So as soon as a new person comes in, I'm sure he gets to know them and speak with them, and he could probably tell you how long they've been there. And his support system would have become very much the people around him, the people in the same circles as him. But see, Bethesda was a place he should have visited, but it became his home, and it became his prison. He got stuck there around people who sort of thought the same as him, spoke the same as him. And actually, his support system has become his support trap. The conversations that they were having, I wonder how life-giving they were. I don't know if you've ever come across people who are having a hard time and they just want to find people who will sympathize with them and say what they want to hear. And there's a time and there's a place for that. But actually, do you have people around you that tell you as it is? Actually tell you sometimes you just need to buck your ideas up. Sometimes it's as simple as that. And it's really important who you surround yourself with, who you're allowing to have that input. And I imagine there would have been quite a defeatist attitude around the pool of Bethesda, because if only one person is getting healed each time, it must have been really demoralizing if you weren't the one to get healed. And I'm sure afterwards there were conversations, oh, why wasn't it me? Or, if you've got a good friend, oh, I wish it could have been you that time. But there would have been this sort of same feeling around there. But actually, the negativity of those conversations can actually feed into us in a bad way. When you are feeling stuck in a situation, when you are feeling trapped, or maybe you're feeling low, who are the people that you go to? Are they people who help you get more stuck in that situation? Or are they people who sometimes will speak in a little bit of hard truth and actually help you to get out of that place that you're stuck in? It's so important who you surround yourself with. I've got a picture I'm going to put up next to illustrate my point of a bird. Does anybody know what kind of bird that is? No guesses, no guesses. I'm going to put up another one, that might give you more of a clue. I heard flamingo from over this side of the room. It is the flamingo. But what's interesting about a flamingo is they shouldn't really be pink. If we go back to the one of them born as a baby, very grey, even as a semi-young bird, it's a grey bird. But then they become pink and they become the animals that we recognise down on the salt lakes. But the reason they're pink is because of the food that they eat. And they turn more pink depending on what sort of minerals and everything that they're taking in. And in the same way, what you feed from is what you become. It's so important who you have around you speaking in. You know, you could come every Sunday and you could listen to me or whoever's speaking, and you can walk out through the door and you can not let it sink in, or you can let it sink in. But in the week, if you're listening to people or if you're picking up a podcast that's speaking negativity in, whatever it might be, if you're feeding yourself on those kind of things, that's the kind of flavor that you're going to become. Just like a flamingo starts to turn pink as it eats certain foods, we're the same. We start to change depending on the input that we have. And it's so important that you have the right input. The friendships you have will determine the future you have. I know there's so many people in my life, so many friends who have spoken in at important times. Sometimes they've just encouraged me and said it's okay, and there is definitely a time and place for that. But sometimes they've said, you need to get on with it, you need to pull up your socks, you need to crack on, you need to just get on with it, not sit and wallow. And I was back in the UK this week and I was speaking to one of my very good friends, and we were speaking about another friend who's a pastor of one of our churches, and talking about how he'll often be the person who encourages and speaks in life. But the reason when he encourages us it means so much to us is because if we're doing something wrong or we're not in the best place, equally he'll speak in and he'll call us out and he'll say, that isn't the best thing. And I've been called out in front of a whole room of people and told to basically, come on, it's time to get going. And it means that actually when he speaks life into me and comforts me, it's like, it means all the more. And I know that my life has been helped and directed in a good way because of the friends that I've had around me, the people that have spoken in and spoken life when it's needed and spoken in encouragement as well. And then we have our final trap, which is the shade trap. Now this is a sneaky one because we don't always easily see this one coming. It's more of a subtle one, I think. And I think it can quite often be linked to the previous one, because as we speak to people who encourage us to maybe take a back seat, to step back a little bit, to step into the shade, we get trapped in this place that's further away from the miracle that we need to be at. Now I've got a photo. This is an artist's impression of the pool of Bethesda. It probably would have had a lot more people around it than this. But when I was reading the scripture, you might have noticed the 5 colonnades, and there would have been these spaces that would have been in the shadows, just slightly away from the edge of the pool. And we know, living in Cyprus, how hot it gets in the summer. You don't want to be sat in direct sunlight, do you? And I imagine when you first arrive at Bethesda and you want the miracle, you probably are sat at the poolside because you're really hungry for it. But you know, if you've been there 38 years, sitting in the sun, you start to withdraw, don't you? Think, actually, I might just sit in the shade today. It's a little bit of a hot one. I'm going to sit back here and I'll just watch what's going on. And actually, once you've moved into the shade, it's not so nice to move back into the heat again, is it? While we were in the UK last week, it was actually really hot for the UK. It was up in the mid-30s. And what we realized is that we've become so accustomed to air conditioning here in the UK that my parents' house was like an oven. You know, normally in here we'll retreat to a building, we'll find AC and we're like, oh, we've cooled down. But actually we didn't have that there. But there's something about once you're used to that shade, you're used to not being in the sunlight, you don't want to come and sit in it again. And actually it's really hard to make your way back through, especially if there's a crowd. Once that front row then has been taken up with people ready for the miracle, is how do you get back out of the shade and back into the promise that God has for each one of you? I remember some years ago now, I went to a Coldplay concert with my cousin. And I like to be early, he likes to be very early. And the concert wasn't until something like 9 p.m. at night. 2 p.m. we're already at the stadium ready for it. And it's a football stadium, so it's got no roof. And as soon as the gates open, he wants to be down at the front. And to be fair, we were about 5 people from the very front. And it was great, and we were really close. Been quite a few hours. They were giving us water, sun cream. It was a really hot day. And he says to me, just before the Coldplay start, he said, "I need the toilet." And I said, "Robert, if you go to the toilet now, there is no way you're getting back through the crowd." And in the end, he had to stay there for the whole concert. Because, you know, once you've gone into the shade, trying to make your way back through to the crowd, it's very difficult. And there's something within us as we move into the shade, if we move out of that purpose and that calling, and we think it's just a little bit more comfortable here. Maybe it's like, I think just this month, I'm not going to serve this month. I'm just going to take a little bit of time to myself. And you move into the shade. And before you know it, that moves into, well, I'll just come 3 Sundays out of 4 this month because it's quite hot and it's a bit difficult to be here. And then that becomes stepping back further and further. And the shade trap is a difficult one because sometimes we don't even recognize we're in it. Sometimes we don't realize that we've fallen into this place where actually now we're a long way from where the miracles are happening. We're suddenly right on the edge. We're looking in from a distance and we don't get to experience what God wants us to experience. And today, I don't say any of this in a way to condemn you. If you find yourself in one of these situations, I want to encourage you. Just as Jesus looked down at that man, he didn't look down with him with condemnation and say, "Why are you still here?" He just simply said, "Do you want to get well?" There's a plan and there's a future for your life that you don't even know about yet, if only you want it. But often for each one of us, the miracle that we need is leaving Bethesda, is walking away from that part of our lives. What Jesus said to him at the end was, pick up your mat and walk. Go. Leave this place. And we saw Peter come in at the end and say, "You're not coming back here." It's because the miracle had happened. And the miracle was Jesus. It wasn't the water. It wasn't Bethesda. It was Jesus himself. And the same Jesus that we get to experience today. What a beautiful picture that is. And so if today you look at those places and you think, actually, I kind of recognize some of that in myself. There's something of me that needs to step out from the system. That I'm just this is the way it's going to be. This is how I'm prescribing the miracle is going to happen. And Jesus is coming in and saying, no. I am the miracle that you need. Don't worry about the system. Don't worry about how it's going to happen. Just focus on me. Maybe you need to step out from the support. Maybe there are people in your life where you're like, actually, I don't know if their input is the best input for me. And I'm not saying walk away from your friends, but I'm saying the input that you give credit to, that you like kind of take on board and act on, make sure that's coming from a good place. Make sure that's coming from a place that's going to take you away from being stuck into a place of movement rather than being more stuck. Or maybe you need to step out of the shade. Maybe in this past season you've taken a little bit more of a backseat than you did before. And that could look like anything in multiple different ways. Maybe you were someone who was really active in church and for different reasons you find yourself on the edge right now and you think, I don't even know how to get back from the shade. Maybe there was calling and purpose over your life and you've kind of stepped away from that a little bit. And right now you're just kind of letting life pass you by. Maybe it's time to step out of the shade and step into freedom. See, the devil, his purpose is to steal, to kill, and destroy. And if he can keep you in any of those systems, he's winning. He's keeping you trapped. But God wants freedom for each one of you. It says in Galatians 5 verse 1, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. I love that verse there. It's for freedom that Christ set us free. He wants us to be free. He doesn't want us to be trapped by anything. And the ending of that verse says, do not let yourselves be burdened again by the yoke of slavery. There's something on us not walking back into that slave mentality, of us not walking into those different areas of being trapped away from the calling and the purpose that is over all of our lives. I look across this room and there's purpose in each one of your lives. God has a plan, a purpose, and a destiny for each one of you. And so today, on what is our last Sunday in this building, what better day than to take stock of where we are, to look at our lives and reflect and say, God, I want to step out of some of those things. I want to step back into the purposes that you have for my life. I want this freedom. I don't want to feel trapped in any way. And maybe that's been 1 week that you've been feeling this way. Maybe it's a month. Maybe it's a few years. But actually today, as we draw a line in the sand of this season that has been a wonderful season, and in a moment we're going to share some of the things that have happened in this time that we've been in this building. But actually, as we thank God for what has been and we look into what is next, let's walk into it as free people. Let's not walk into it trapped by some of these areas and find ourselves in a new building but actually just doing the same thing, just locked in the same routine,